Hey, hey all, this is Ron Coddington from Military Images Magazine coming to you with a special session. I'm not a professional educator by any stretch of the imagination. However, this class, I'm calling it a class, is about scanning images, particularly Civil War photographs, and that includes albumen prints. It also includes hard plate images. And I'm going to let everybody come on in as we're getting started here. I see Jim Revest is on. How are you doing tonight, Jim? Other folks are coming in. I see the numbers are starting to jump up here. I think that's great. Appreciate you being here tonight. Hope you had a good President's Day. And as mentioned, we're going to be talking about photography, Civil War photographs, how to scan albumen prints, and how to scan hard plate images. I'm also going to show you how we treat them after we do the scan, how we use Photoshop to treat them. So that's the plan for the evening. So we're going to look at the scanner. We are going to look at Photoshop and see how we use that. And the result is going to be the images that you see in Military Images Magazine. And the reason that I'm doing this broadcast is at your request. I've had a number of questions over the years about how we do this. I did a broadcast, gosh, probably back in 2015, and there was some problems with the archiving. It was Zoom, if I recall, and there was some problems. It cut off in mid-broadcast, and I lost the ability to archive it. So that show is lost to history. So on some level, it's a redo. But even after I did those broadcasts, the questions continue to come. So while we're waiting for a couple more folks to come on, Laura, thanks for being here. Ben, thanks for the nice words. Liz Topping, thank you. I believe, Liz, you were in that last broadcast. Rick, how are you doing tonight? Great to see you. Hope all is well in West Virginia. Kyle, go 10th New York Cavalry. I'm glad that all of you are here. So I think I'll probably get going. We have a critical mass on. And I should also mention, we are broadcasting this live on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. It's going to be archived afterwards on Facebook and on YouTube. Probably your best bet is to go to our YouTube channel and check it out. You can go to YouTube and look for Military Images, and you'll find this broadcast and a bunch of other videos that we've done in the past. So hours of fun for all of you. So a couple things I want to talk to first about is why do we even do this? Why do we digitize these images? And part of it, I think, is because you want to share something on social media, or someone you know has asked you for a digital copy or a scan because they want to publish it in a book or an article or some other venue. They might want to put it on a blog post or somewhere else. So there's a lot of great reasons for doing it, to be able to get the word out about your images. Another reason, and in my mind, it's incredibly important, is that by scanning something digitally, you're committing an act of preservation. It's one thing to preserve an image by keeping it well preserved in archival sleeves or in felt cases, in temperature controlled environments. All that is hugely important to keep that original image in as good a condition as it could possibly be. And I've written on this. You can go onto our website and find my editorial about preservation. In that article, I also talk about the idea of digitizing. And so it's part of the process of preservation. You catalog something, which is you record what you know about the photograph, when you bought it, who you bought it from, how much you paid, because you've just become part of the provenance of the image that you either purchased or traded, however you came into possession of it, you are now part of its history. So make a point of cataloging it, document that image, and then store it safely. Make sure it's stored safely. Before you get to the safe storage part, digitize it. So that's my intro so that you understand where I'm coming from when I think about all this. I see questions coming in. Digitizing an image, especially of damages from Paul Mitchell, can allow it to be repaired without affecting the actual image itself. Paul, that's a great point. You could take a damaged image and have it go to take it to someone who is a professional restorer that works in Photoshop and other applications and can make it look more like the original. Your image, if it's damaged, depending upon what kind of damage there is. For example, if your tintype is rusting, you might want to consult a professional conservator. So that's a subject for a different talk. But your question is a good one, or your comment is a good one, and I appreciate that. So one more thing actually I want to say before I tell you about the scanner is for those of you who are, I'll say, born prior to 1970 or 1975, you remember the days, the non-digital days of 35 millimeter cameras and light tables. And I like to explain that moment in time, that pre-digital setup. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, great. If you don't, back before scanners and digitization, you had a table with a camera, a 35 millimeter camera mounted on top of it. Your photograph was on the tabletop, and you had lights around the table, and you could control the lighting, snap your photo, get your 35 millimeter shot, develop your print, and you would have a good image. What I like to think about when we're doing digital scanning is that the actual scanning part is the camera. Your scanner is your 35 millimeter camera back in the days of old. Those lights that are around the camera back in those days, the lights are what we're going to do in Photoshop. So think about it as a two-step process. Back in the day, before computers, it was one step: camera, lights, action. Here, we're looking at scanner, Photoshop. So two steps, both related, very similar to the old 35 millimeter days. So there's that. Now, a word about scanners. I use, and I need to say this also. I have no relationship with Epson, none at all. I have, but I've been a very satisfied customer. I've been using Epson scanners probably since the early 2000s. Excuse me. For those of you who have one or more of my books, most of those scans were done on Epson scanners. The most current scanner, the one that I use today, and if you see me at the shows with my sleek black scanner, that's an Epson 600. Epson 600 Perfection is the model. You can go online. You can find them for, I believe right now they're selling for $249.99. And I realize that you're on a budget. Most people are on a budget. Good for you if you're not. But when you think about a $249 investment for a scanner compared to the value of your collection, the images that you collect, it's really not an expensive investment. So think about that as you are deciding whether or not to digitize your images. So the Epson 600, pardon me, the Epson 600, the V600, and that's the Perfection. So you can spend a lot more on scanners, but this model is really strong. It has a great scanning wand. The equipment inside is wonderful. I've lugged this thing around to Mansfield, Ohio, to Franklin, Tennessee. It'll be with me in DC in a couple of weekends, and in Baltimore after that. So Gettysburg, this scanner is, like a best friend. We go all over together, and it's been holding up well. So I recommend it highly. So there we go. Now, a word about the images to give you a sense of what we're getting into here. The first one I'm going to show you, I chose an image that I recently added to my collection and haven't scanned yet. So this is a carte de visite. Let's see if I can get in the right light here. There you go. This is Cabot Russell, 54th Massachusetts Infantry, killed at Fort Wagner. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have this image in my collection. And you can see it's got the back mark here. Well, maybe you can't. There you go. So this image here, I want to show you because if you look closely, you will see the print image and then the cardboard mount. The print image has a little bit of a yellow coloring to it, and it's a little bit shiny. You can see the reflection coming off of it, and especially here, you can see that yellow color, and then the cardboard mount around it is dull, and it's a little bit lighter. But there is a reason for this. This print, this albumen paper, is coated, as the name implies, with a white. It was at one time much more shiny and glossy. But you've got that, and then you have the cardstock mount onto which it is mounted. And that cardstock it's fine paper, and it's been nicely pressed, but it's not shiny. So as you can see, when the light hits the surface, it acts differently. So this is why we have problems when you have problems when you're scanning, when I have problems when I'm scanning, because you have one kind of light that's hitting two different surfaces. Now, if you think that's complicated, here's a 9th plate ambrotype. Look at what's going on here. This is I love this image. It's a Union soldier wearing his greatcoat. But look at all the different materials we're talking about here. You have the glass of the ambrotype. You have a glass mat or a glass protector on top of the ambrotype. You have a brass mat. You can see the velvet lining running around it. And then, of course, the case itself. So each of those different materials has a different surface, and it acts differently when you're exposing it to light. So where a carte de visite has two different surfaces, the print area and the cardboard mount, your ambrotype or tintype has got what 1, 2, 3, 4 different surfaces. So back in the pre-digital days, to get the lighting just right to be able to make that shot was a trick. You had to be fairly experienced and have some good knowledge about how to do it. So there's a bit of preface, there's a bit of setup. So I'm going to open up the scanner here. I've got it right next to me. And we'll start with the image of Russell, Cabot Russell. I, by the way, have these these are non-dust cloths, which I usually wipe the surface with after every scanning because I'm OCD. And I also like to have, I don't like to see threads and pieces of hair. Not that any of it would be mine, but hair, threads, lint, stuff like that gets on the surface of the glass. So keep it clean. Good scanning hygiene is important. So let me share my screen here and show you, see if we can get this. All right. Somebody give me a heads up and let me know if you can see it. All right. Let's see. All right. I think you can see the scanner. You should be able to see it. And what I'm going to do is you'll notice let's take a look at the scanning window. Look at these settings over here. Now, I'm working on a Macintosh. Some of you may know that I started out in the world as a graphic designer and an illustrator. And so I've been a Mac person since computers came out. The particular window that we're seeing here, the scanning window, is the one that's built into my Macintosh. If you're on a PC, yours may look different. If you're on a Mac, yours may look different. Whatever it looks like, whatever the interface design is, you're probably going to have these settings here. So I'll run through them very quickly. You got flatbed scanner, which is the kind of scanner we're using. I have it set for color. You can set it for black and white. Set it for color because it's color. Even though your albumen print is sepia, it's actually color. Under colors, set it for millions of colors. I don't think you need billions. Millions ought to do fine. The resolution, 1,200 dpi. That's 1,200 dots per inch. And that is considered archival by the Library of Congress. So you can use 1,200 when I'm at the shows scanning. I use 1,200. On my personal collection, I use 2,400, which means it's big enough that you can put it on the side of a barn. I'm not going to scan 2,400 tonight because it takes a little bit long. So I'm keeping it to 1,200. Notice the auto selection. I keep this turned off, and I'll show you why in a minute. I've got it scanning to a particular folder. You can give it whatever name you want. The format is really important. It's a TIFF file. A TIFF file is uncompressed, so it's going to be a big file. But the fact that it's uncompressed means every bit of information that you get in the scan is going to be preserved. If you save it as a JPEG, for example, which is a popular format, it actually compresses that file. So the pro is that the file size is small. The con is that in compressing the file, you lose some information, especially if you open it and close it and save it. Every time you do that, it degrades a little bit more. So do yourself a favor and scan it as a TIFF. That way you keep all the information and it will stay there as long as you have the file. Now, I want to say a word about these last few settings down here. Image correction, unsharp mask, descreening, backlight correction, dust removal, color restoration. Do yourself a favor. Don't use them. Turn them off. Because if you have those settings on in any way, shape, or form, what you're actually doing is distorting the information in the original image. Okay, so think about it a second. If I set the unsharp mask to high, it's going to sharpen the image and it's going to change the actual image itself by sharpening it. The act of sharpening it will change that original image. So it won't be that raw, beautiful digital scan. It's going to be manipulated. So don't fall into that trap. The downside of this is when you leave these settings off, your image is going to be, it's going to usually be darker if it's a hard plate, or it's going to be more yellow if it's an albumen print. And that's why we're going to fix it, if you will, in Photoshop. So here we go. I'm going to hit the overview scan. We're going to wait a minute here. And I can hear the scanner doing its wonderful thing. Now, if I was not on video right now, I would be scanning at 2,400, and I would also be scanning the back at 1,200 dpi. I'm going to skip the back tonight, and we're just going to stay with the front. So, so here we have, this is the overview. This is the preview scan. Now, over on the right-hand side, remember where I said auto selection off? The reason I set that as off is because I can now go over to this image and click and drag, and I can surround the image. Now, if you've scanned images for military images, You know that I always ask you to leave ample margin around the edges. Why is that? Because when we publish an image in the magazine, or when I'm saving something for archival purposes, I want to see the whole thing. I don't want to see a crop of the image. I don't want to see the edges just barely cut off. Give me some margin. And so the way I can do that is by having auto selection turned off. It enables me to control the area that I select. So if I had the auto selection turned on, the dotted line you see would probably be looking something like this. It would be like right up against the edge of the image. And when you do that, it's going to cut off the edges of the image. So we don't want that. So I'm drawing this the way that I want it. I'm giving it some margin. Actually, I'll come in a little bit more. We'll do this. And then everything is turned off down here. I'm set for 1200. I've called it cleverly naming convention of scan. It's a TIFF file, so I'm going to hit the scan button, and it's going to do its thing. And while it's doing its thing, I'll take a quick look here in the comments field. Okay. Liz Topping is asking the question, what external hard drive are you saving to? What I am doing is I save this image to, in the original scan, the one I'm doing right now, that high resolution TIFF, and it's going to be, I don't know, it could be 30, 40, 50 megabytes, depending upon what I'm scanning. That's a big file. So I'm going to scan that to my desktop of my laptop computer, but it's not going to stay there for very long because I don't have enough room on my laptop to be able to save and keep all the images locally. So what I do, I save it to two different places. I do have an external backup drive, pardon me, and that's I think it's a 2 terabyte drive, and I will move it to that backup drive. And it's an external device, and so I plug it in. The other thing that I will do is I will also put it on the cloud. I have a Google Drive account, which I believe costs something like $9.99 a month. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But I've got, I think I have like 3 terabytes of space. So I save it in both places. I have it on the cloud, basically redundancy. I have a version on the cloud through Google Drive, and then I keep a version on my external hard drive. And most of the time, I'll use my external hard drive because it's handy and it's easier for me than to have to go into Google Drive and download the whole thing. I can easily drag it over from my external hard drive. Also, a question from Frank, how does the scanner software work with Windows 10? Hang on a second, I'll answer that. But before I do it, I'm going to open up the scanner and I'm going to remove the image of Cabot Russell. So our CDV is now been removed, and I'm going to put our ambrotype. Before that, I'm going to wipe down the surface, which I've just done, and make sure that the glass on the ambrotype is clean. So I'm going to not drop it, I'm going to carefully place the ambrotype on the scanner. And I'm not going to close the scanner top, because if I do that, I run the risk of damaging the ambrotype. So I'm putting a piece of paper on top of it. So you will see in just a minute. I'm setting up the overview scan right now, which you can see. And voila, you can see the ambrotype and you can see the piece of paper sitting on top of it. And what I'll do is I'll draw my shape around it. And we'll call this scan 2, and we'll start scanning. So I chose a 9th plate because it's smaller and hopefully will go a little bit faster. While that's happening, Frank's question, how does the scanner software work with Windows 10? The scanner software, it's hard for me to answer that with precision because I'm not a Windows user, but I know people who are PC users. The big difference that we encounter is the interface for the scanner looks different. And so that can be a little bit off-putting or confusing. So like any interface, you have to get familiar with it. And once you get familiar with it, you're usually okay. But the scanner software, the Epson software that comes with the scanner should work. If you have a built-in scanner like I do on my Mac, if you have a built-in scanning software for your PC, that can also do the same thing. Mike Jenkins' question, scanning doesn't hurt the image. The way that I think about it, Mike, is, and I'm now taking the ambrotype off the screen. We'll put this to the side. I think about it as going to a doctor's office or going to a clinic and getting an x-ray done. The x-ray is going to pass through you for a millisecond. You're going to get some exposure, and then the result is going to be a scan of you for the doctor. It's the same thing with the photography. It's going to be a quick hit of light. It's going to be over. So it's not going to do any measurable damage. I should also note that most of the damage that has happened to these images has happened in the first few years after they were produced. So the sunlight, the exposure to humidity and all of that, that's where most of your damage has happened. So if you're concerned about damage with scanning, you're really not going to get, for the amount of light exposure we're talking about, it's not going to affect it in any significant way. A good question. Here's another one from Martin Monson. Would black paper as a background color better for scan 2? I prefer to have a white background because you have greater contrast between the actual frame and what's in the background. So if you put a piece of black paper, then it's harder to see the case around it. And that becomes a problem if you're doing something like I'm doing, which is to put it into Military Images magazine. We want a white background around it, not a black background. So it's better to have a light color background. Also neutral backgrounds, a gray, a light gray, or a neutral gray, I think would also work. One other thing I'll mention about this, even though a frame doesn't, a gutta percha frame isn't exactly reflective, it does pick up the edges. So if you have a dark background, or if you used a piece of red paper, not that you would, if you used a piece of red paper in the background, some of that reflection would show up in the case. And that gets kind of, I'll just say, sort of weird looking. Chuck Thomas's question now, do you get that bar bisecting image to show up on the scanning software? The bar bisecting the image, no, that's so you can turn it if you want. You can rotate it, but I take care of that in Photoshop because it's easier. I find it easier to work with this in Photoshop. So, all right. So now we're done scanning, and I'm going to call up Photoshop. And so what I'm doing, and you're not seeing right now, is I'm going to that folder that's called Scanning 101. Pardon me. And inside of that, I have just found the 2 images that I've scanned, and I've called them up. So let's see here. Everybody good so far? You hanging in there? Thanks for the good questions. I think I've got them all so far. Yeah, all right. I should also say I like Craig's comment. Good scanning hygiene is important. It's one of my favorites. So wash your hands. All righty. Now, I'm going to share the screen. And let's see here. Here we go. All right. And okay, I'm now calling up the screen. And what you're seeing right now is the carte de visite of Cabot Russell. And if you remember the dotted line that I made when I scanned it, that's why we now have these generous margins. And so to answer the question about rotating, I'm going to turn this background to white so you can see this, see what happens. If I select the entire image, and in Photoshop, I'm going to rotate the image, I have a lot of flexibility in what I can do. So that's why I find it easier to use Photoshop to do that. So I'm going to now undo what I just did. So I think that was Martin's question about rotating. I use Photoshop to do this. Photoshop, I realize, is something that you have to subscribe. It's an Adobe product. There are other applications you can use. I have not checked into them because I'm an avid, long-time Photoshop user. So Photoshop is my tool of choice. So I give you that caveat. So you'll have some additional investment. Back in the day, you'd have to buy the application, and it could be rather expensive. Nowadays, you just rent it. And you access it through the web. So let me see, any other questions coming in? Okay, we're good right now. So now I'm going to show you what you can see here, and I'll come up a little bit more. Look at the quality. I mean, it's perfect. Perfect 1200 dpi scan. And you can see there's no, and this is where a great scanner, a great flatbed scanner comes into play. The Epson is made for one purpose and one purpose only. It is a scanner. It doesn't do copying. It doesn't fax. It doesn't do anything else. It only does scanning. So it's got a much better quality scanning device in it. And the result is just the wonderful, wonderful quality that you get when you're using the scan. So there it is. Now, you can also see, compared to the original, this is yellow. It's more yellow than the original is, and the cardboard, the cardstock mount is also darker than it should be compared to my original. So what I'm going to do, and I don't know if this is quotable, but Carrie Dellery, who is a dealer, owns a historical shop, he called what I'm about to show you the dancing ants. So here it is. Over in Photoshop, you've got a tool bar along the side, and down towards the bottom is the pen tool. If you select that pen tool, you'll see the little pen icon. If I hold down the caps key, it becomes a target, which I find easier to see. I'm going to start drawing a shape around this image, only around the albumen print. So this is important because what I'm trying to do here is I am trying to actually select the albumen print shape. That's my goal here, because I'm going to apply some filters to it. I'm going to adjust it so that it looks closer to the original and gets rid of that heavy yellow presence. So I'm drawing a shape using the pen tool. And now I have the shape drawn, and you should be able to see the lines. And if I go, I've drawn a path, is what I've done. I'm going to go to the path tool. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to feather it with 0 radius. And when I do that, you'll see these little jumping dots. This is what Carrie Dellery calls the dancing ants. So this tells you that we've highlighted the image area. So I like to apply what I think of as photojournalist adjustments. I don't remove dust. I don't remove scratches. I don't remove blemishes. I will only adjust it for the contrast and for the color. So if I go to image and then I go to adjust contrast, and let me see if you're seeing this. Hang on. Yeah. I'm going to adjust the contrast. Okay. And I don't know if you saw that happen from my pull down, but there's a menu item to adjust contrast. I'm going to undo this. It's basically called auto contrast. So I'm going to go to image and auto contrast, and boom, you see the difference. This is much closer to the original, but it's also more yellow. It's a more intense sepia tone than the original. So then I go to image, adjust, and hue, saturation. And I regret that you're not seeing this right now, but I do have a little window that allows me to change the saturation. And if I pull that saturation down, you will see the yellow begins to go away, and it turns more of a light sepia tone. And this is much closer. What you see now is much closer to the original. So now that takes care of the albumen prints. The cardstock mount is still kind of a dull, dark color. So what I go to is I select the inverse of the image. And when I do that, the dancing ants have now flipped, and they're basically looking at the cardstock mount. And I go to make an adjustment, and this time I go to the exposure adjustment in Photoshop, and I begin to make it lighter, as you can see here. I make it a little bit lighter, and then once I'm done with that, I go to hue and saturation, and I pull that saturation down until it's less yellow and closer to the original. So that's what we have. This is the result of using Photoshop to adjust the contrast and the color in the original scan. So I'm going to save this for the moment. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up that original scan so you can see here is the raw scan in Photoshop, and here is the adjusted version. So those of you who subscribe to Military Images, when you wonder why they look so crisp and why they don't look too yellow, this is why, because I've made these adjustments for the contrast and the color. So this doesn't mean this version is also an archival version, but it's adjusted. So if you were to say both of them, one of them could be your original raw version, and one could be your adjusted version. Now, while you're in Photoshop, you can also crop around the edges of this so that you get rid of all that margin. And then you can also make the image size smaller, because right now it's a huge file. If you can see down here, it's currently 43 megabytes. You're not going to post that on Facebook. You're going to send it to me, and I'm going to be very, very happy that you did. But it's not going to be able to be shared on email or social media. So you'll want to go into Photoshop, and you can change the image size to make a smaller file. You can export it as a JPEG. You can add your watermark to it, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the albumen photograph. Now I'm going to pause for just a second. Let's see here. Paul, Betty Bridges is asking, have you used Lightroom? I have not, but I know others that have. So Lightroom might be a solution for you. To me, the only reason I use Photoshop, as I mentioned earlier, is because I have been trained in Photoshop and I know it. But if you use Lightroom, if you use some other application, as long as it has the ability to adjust the hue and saturation and the contrast and the color, then you're good. So it's really up to you. It's what you're comfortable using. It's what you can afford to use. Let me see. Elizabeth Topping, maybe GIMP. I'm not familiar with that. So if that's a raw file format, then sure. Craig, do you ever try to change the contrast color hue so that the cart appears closer to as you imagine it likely looked originally? No, because to do that, excuse me, if I was to do what you said, I would have to make it look more purplish or more eggplant, because when cartes de visite or albumens of any kind were produced, the original, when you got them, they had sort of a purple brown, a deep, rich purpley brown hue. And that was what photographers were encouraged to aspire to. So it wasn't necessarily natural, because when you're working with the chemicals, you can get different results, but they all aimed for that purplish eggplant hue. So for me to get that purplish eggplant coloring, I would have to then go into colors and start doing all kinds of manipulations to approximate what I think it should be. And I think that's too far of a leap for me as a photojournalist to take. Having said that, I could see the value in it, but it's just not something that I'm interested in. I do think that there is a responsibility to show the image as it appears today. And so that's my take on it. Let's see here. Now I am going to, I'm going to go back to share, and let's take a look at our other image, our ambrotype. So let's go back here, and we're going to go to this. And so it's basically the same idea. I'm going to come up here, and you can see, look at the quality. You can see the texture around here, the individual threads. You can see the brass mat. Look at the little crack that you can see here. You can see the rubbing around the edges of the ambrotype. You can see the soldier's face ever so slightly out of focus. You can see the clasp of the case. You can see the felt. It's all there, and it's really in great resolution. One of the wonderful things about the Epson and other high-quality scanners is that wand, as it scans through the image, it seems able to pick up a few millimeters of distance, which is wonderful. So I'm going to grab the pen tool, and I will go around here. I am interested specifically in the oval area that is around the opening of the mat. And so I feel a little bit like the painter Bob Ross, who's adding effects. So I'm not adding any pretty trees or clouds or rivers this evening, but I do like to think that Bob Ross would be pleased, because we are making something that is beautiful and that is an ambrotype portrait that is more than 100 and probably more than 100, about 160 years old at this point. We're going to make it digital friendly. So I've got the path. I'm going to select that path and hold on, because I should get the original here again. It's actually pretty clear and it's pretty bright in this original. So I'm going to go to, just like I did with the albumen print, I'm going to choose auto contrast. Boom. That's really really pops there, and you can see that it's actually pumped up the volume a little bit. Look at the rose around his the tinting on his cheeks, the rose tinting. That is not quite as visible in the original. I can see it, but it looks more pronounced. It looks more pronounced in the scan right now than it does, and we're going to fix that in just a moment. But while I'm here, I'm going to do that same trick. I'm going to select the inverse, and then I'm going to do the auto contrast thing. And I hope you saw the difference there. It got a little bit brighter. The white background is a little bit more white. The matte is a little brighter. The red velvet is a bit brighter, and the case is a bit brighter. So now, when you saw me using the albumen print, I used the hue and the saturation. In this case, I'm going to use a different filter. But first, let me go to the inverse to get back to selecting just the oval. And this time, I'm going to go to okay, I'm going to go to image, and I'm going to go to levels. And you're not able to see this window, but I have a feature called levels, and this allows me to change the 4 color channels: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or in graphic design speak, CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So each one of these has a profile, and I can control that profile. And so I'm going to start with cyan or blue, and there's a couple of draggers here, and you'll see as I'm dragging these in, it's adding blue to the image, and it's adding it in such a way that is making it more along its natural. It's highlighting the natural blue in the image. Now I'm moving to magenta, and I'm moving in the magenta draggers. I'm going to yellow, and you'll see when I move the yellow ones in that we're going to start to lose that heavy yellow color, and then we're going to go to black, and that's going to darken it up a little bit, and then I'm going to adjust that just a little bit more. For that, the magenta is there. I'm going to hit OK. And so now I've gone into the 4 color channels and adjusted it. And then I'm going to go into hue and saturation, and I'm going to desaturate it looking at the original. I have the original in front of me right here. Sorry, right here. I'm going to reduce the hue and saturation so that the rose color on his cheeks looks more like it does in the photograph, and it looks like it's maybe right about there. So I'm going to hit OK, and there we have it. This is the ambrotype. I'm going to save this ambrotype, and then I will call up the original scan so you can see the difference. And here we go. Here is the original scan on the Epson. And again, this is really important. This is your archival. This is your natural state of the image, that original scan. All the information is in there. And then, and then here is the one that I've adjusted the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black color channels, and then change the hue and saturation to desaturate it a little bit. So there you have it. Okay. There we go. All right. So there you go. That is the presentation. And if you've got additional questions, I don't see anything else coming through. I see a note here from Patrick Vance, stopped at 3858. I hope that's wrong, because according to what I'm seeing, it says we're having trouble streaming to Facebook. So, but we are still going strong on YouTube and on Twitter. So that's what I've got for now. And I will let you know on Facebook where this is, where you can find it on YouTube. If for some reason you did miss the end of it on Facebook, you'll be able to catch it on YouTube. So thank you so much for tuning in and for participating. Look forward to your questions online. So take care. Bye.